You're listening to Artful Divorce, a podcast dedicated to helping you make sense of the divorce process. I'm John Kinney, a family law attorney, and I'm here to help you find clarity with practical advice and compassionate insights. Hi, this is John Kinney. We're here with the Artful Divorce podcast with Kelly Gering, who is a therapist and also a mediator who works in Omaha, putting together parenting plans for divorcing couples and couples in conflict. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, John.
We are going to jump right into parenting plans, and I guess before we get to the content, Kelly, tell us about how, at least in Omaha, in Douglas County, which is where you do the most of your work, tell us how folks come to you and how you handle just the intake with couples.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different pathways. The first is in Douglas County, if they've filed, I'm a part of what is called a 4-3 panel for Douglas County Conciliation Court and Mediation Services. There are a group of us that do this work, and we will get a case that will come in from conciliation that we've been assigned to serve as a mediator. That's one pathway. Another pathway is that attorneys can refer their clients, and that can be really for any county, so Douglas, Sarpy, Washington, Dodge, and they can refer their clients to come to me to create a parenting plan. And they'll usually do that first at the beginning of the process. And the intake is really that I get their contact information and I reach out to each parent and set up an individual private session to begin to learn both what's important to them and also to share the process. Because most people have never been through mediation before. They call it meditate. They don't know, it's like it's a very unique experience. So they're nervous and they want to understand, and they're scared about what might be taken from them or how that's going to look moving forward, especially with their children. So a lot of time educating them about the process, talking with them about what is important to them, and then after having met with both of them, figuring out the best process to engage good problem solving with them.
Okay, I'm just going to give you a lawyer's perspective on that process. I have clients who question why they're meeting alone with the mediator, and they are wondering about are they meeting with the other side, and they're very curious and maybe a little suspicious of that process. And I try to explain to them that the intake process is for a reason, and those individual meetings are to get an understanding of the agendas of both parties before you get into a mediation session, and to also, like as you said, explain the process. But I do find that many times clients are sort of in a hurry. They kind of wonder why are we doing it? Why do I have to have a meeting and that? Like, can't we just jump right in? So I guess before we move on, why not just jump right in?
Yeah, that's there are many reasons for that. First of all, there's a credential that mediators can have called specialized alternative dispute resolution. So those of us that have that are looking in the initial meeting for all different kinds of power dynamics. We're searching for safety both physically and psychologically. So we want to make sure that if we're going to bring people together in whatever space configuration, and we can talk about that, that they're going to be safe with one another to problem solve. So if there's a protection order, if there's a history of any sort of intimate partner violence, if they say in that initial intake session, this person is going to dominate and overwhelm, and they know how to trigger me, and I'm not going to be able to do my best work on behalf of my children. Or if I start to ask questions and I can tell, is it less efficient to have individual sessions? Absolutely. Can it be more constructive when the power dynamics are a certain way? Yes. And it's important for those kinds of questions in the beginning to be asked because again, most people have never been through it before. So they think, oh, we'll just go meet at our office. We'll sit down across the table from each other and we'll hash this thing out and we'll be done in a couple hours and I never have to do this again. The thing of it is, though, that depending upon how old that your children are, depending upon what happened in the divorce process, the vulnerability, the wounds, the rawness of where they're at, they're not thinking through a lot of things. One, because many of them have never had to share their children before. So they don't know what that looks like. And a lot of times they just want to get it over with, but they're not thinking through long term. We're not only trying to create a parenting plan for where we are today, but we're trying to create something that's durable and sustainable and can live in the world. So I think that those initial meetings are really important. After I have one with each parent, then I'll reach back out and say either we're going to do a joint session and it's going to be together at the table with me, or I'm going to do what I call shuttle diplomacy and you're going to be in different rooms. And I do that very rarely. If I am going to do individual sessions, I schedule those individually with each parent and I give them time to process while I'm sharing proposals. And give them time to ask me questions. What does this mean when he's offering this? What does this mean when she wants this? Because also what's really, really critical in mediation is not just the what, but the why. When parents say to me, I just want it to be even, I just want it to be 50-50, I will say, what does that mean to you? What does that look like to you? What matters to you with regard to the relationship of your children? And it's very hard to get into that when people are wanting to get it done quick. So my mindset is always go slow to get fast, because once you really get out the heart of the issues, then clients will say to me, okay, now that I know that this is the important why, what have you seen, Kelly, in other parenting plans that could be potential options? And I might list A, B, C, or D. And then they can say, I kind of like this, don't like that, want to shift this. Okay, great. And then and it does go much faster. But in the beginning, it is a critical, both time and money spent to really figure out what this is going to look like and the best way to get it done.
There's a lot that you said that's triggering a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts for me, and I want to get back to them and I don't want to forget them. One of them is, I have these phrases I use in my practice, and one of them is, I say to clients, I wish I could be working with the person that you're going to be 2 years from now. Let's get back to that. But I want to back up and just, for you and I, we're very familiar with arbitration, mediation, litigation, collaborative law. So we tick those things off in our minds and we know backwards and forwards what those mean for folks going through a divorce or a modification. But just because our listeners could be very, very uninformed about all those things, let's just talk about what mediation is, as if you had somebody for your first session. And what do you, Reader's Digest version, what do you tell people about what mediation is?
So with respect to parenting plans, mediation is really an opportunity for you and your parent you are the experts in the lives of your children, to be able to figure out what you believe is best with regard to parenting time, decision-making, holiday definitions, vacation, many other components that can go into a parenting plan, and the role of the mediator. And this is what I think is really important. We're going to presume that both parents in this situation are represented by attorneys. So the role of the attorney is to advocate, to protect, to look out for their legal rights, to make sure that they have what they need. The role of the mediator is to serve as a bridge for communication between the parties, to ensure that the parties are able to problem solve together on behalf of their children. So, textbook definition is that a mediator is a third-party neutral that doesn't have a dog in the fight. So if they are advocating for anyone, they're advocating for the children and for the process to make sure that parents are able to have the conversation that they need to have about their kids. It's interesting, the role of neutrality in terms of the role of the mediator. I have a lot of thoughts on that about whether we're quote unquote neutral or not, and whether that's valuable or not. Because I would say that my job as a mediator is to really establish deep rapport with each party so that they trust me, and to learn what is important to each party and to listen as actively as I possibly can, so that whichever process that we choose, whether it's joint or individual, if I am giving proposals or I am your mouthpiece to the other parent, you believe that I'm going to be delivering what you want and why. And the difference is that the other parent can most of the time hear it better from me than they can from the other parent, depending upon where they're at in the process. So I would say that we're a bridge for communication, and we work in tandem with attorneys, I believe, in a strong partnership to make sure that clients are supported in the process, and mostly that children are at the center of it with the development of a parenting plan.
So you at the end of the day with mediation, hopefully you have a 10 or 20 page parenting plan that has bells and whistles in it, all sorts of guardrails and fences and ways to communicate, ways to parent, Getting back to that notion of working with people going through the crucible of a conflict, parenting conflict and divorce. What do you think about the idea that they are not operating at their best and you're trying to help them make decisions in probably moments of their life where they're just not good decision makers, and you're sending them off into the world with a document that should protect them well into the future and should protect their children? And I guess it's maybe a long way of saying, what steps do you take to protect people from making decisions of the moment that they may not really understand? They may not understand the impact of it later on. They might be giving up the farm, so to speak, that kind of thing.
So the first thing that I'll say is the name of my practice is Shared Story for a reason, because I believe that people are really unable to use the rational part of their brain until they have been given the opportunity to tell their story, to vent everything that, just like what you said, all of the emotional parts of what they're going through. And that's my job in the beginning, is to listen, to acknowledge, to validate, to honor. And then what I will say to them is, we have to honor the past so we have some form of context. But the value of mediation is that we're looking forward. And the dance of mediation is that parents are thinking to themselves, well, I don't want to agree to these things because he never took them to a doctor's appointment. He was never around on the weekends. He never took them to soccer practices. Why should I allow for him to have 50% of the time or 50% of the decision making when I was always the one that did that? And my opportunity is to say, we look at what was, and now let us think about what can be, because your children need you to do that. And as we're thinking about the vision of what could be and hopefully creating that together, then my role is to reality test as many different, have you thought about this? Have you considered that? I've seen other parenting plans that might incorporate this. I mean, there are very real guardrails that need to be put into play, like if there are drug and alcohol issues, if there are kids that are, if there are real safety issues, that's different. But honestly, sometimes those are few and far between, and the other ones are just people that are mad at each other, that want to take things away from their kids. And so what I will say to them is, when you look back to your point of the person that you're going to be 2 years from now, how do you want to feel about the way that you engaged in this process and what you have on the other side? And I wish that there was a model whereby every parent going through the process could be going through therapy at the same time. I really do, because in terms of being good negotiators at the table with their co-parent, There are so many things that need to be worked out in therapy that really don't have anything to do with the negotiation of a parenting plan. And so I am having to continue to bring people back to the issue or the topic at hand, even though they're mad at each other and for good reasons, wildly disappointed. But my mantra with them is, you are ending your marriage and you are entering a new partnership. And that's the business of raising great kids. So how are you going to take off your husband, wife, spouse hat and put on your parent hat and start thinking about what is in the best interest of your kid? It's not divorce. It's the persistence of high conflict between homes that they struggle with. So divorce doesn't have to be the bad thing. And my litmus test with parents is, would you want your marriage for your kids? And 100% of the time they say no. So if I say, well, then you've made this choice to not continue to model this, now you have another opportunity to create a contract of sorts with your co-parent, with your business partner that says, here's how we're going to do it. Even if we hate each other as what we were in the marriage, we can still value each other and value the opportunity to raise really wonderful human beings in the world. And they will frequently say to me, that's the best thing we ever did, were those kids. So you have a vested interest in seeing that how you negotiate and move forward to create the plan is good for them.
Do you ever get concerned that there is sort of conflict fatigue, and you have somebody who just you can almost tell very quickly that hey, I just want this over. I need and we'll almost agree to anything. How do you handle that?
I stop it. So if we're in the middle of joint session and someone is shutting down and acquiescing and accommodating to everything because they're just so tired, I will usually stop the session and do what I call a caucus and send one party out, keep that party in and say, tell me what's going on. And they'll usually start crying and just say, I can't do this anymore. I'm thousands of dollars in it with my attorney. I'm super afraid if this goes in front of the judge, I can't keep looking at them, give them what they want. And I will say, ethically, I don't think that that's a really good choice. And I don't know that that is in the best interest of your children. And as such, I think we need to take a break. And I think we need to stop for now and reconsider coming back and giving them a chance to drink a glass of water and to take a nap and to call their friend and to cry and to think through, how can I get back in it again for my kids? But yeah, I'm not going to I'll just either call mediation unsuccessful or ask the parties if we can take a break and reconvene at another time.
Flip side of the coin, what if somebody is clearly manipulative, a bully, is pushing the other side's buttons psychologically, and seems the power and control dynamic seems to be maybe off the charts? How do you handle that?
Stop it too, because that is a dance that those parents know. It's not just starting with me. It's been going on, and it's probably it's likely a factor as to why they're getting divorced. So I would stop that as well and start with the party. I'd caucus again and start with the party that I feel like is being berated and just say, here's what I'm seeing. Are you feeling this? Because there's a lot of, and my job is to try to mitigate discussion, domination, overwhelm, the ability for one party to come in and do what they've always done. And if the party that's being done to says, yeah, I guess it's just always how it's been. So, and then I'll say, well, not here. I'm never going to create a space where you can harm someone else. So if you want to do that on your own time outside of my office, that's your choice. And then I'm going to figure out a different process, and my process is going to be individually. And because I want to create a space where people can share their truth. And if you can't do that in front of your co-parent because it's always just been how they want it to be and they drive it, then again, that doesn't serve your children.
So in a prior podcast, I talked about with Sarah Batter, the therapist, the idea that if everybody had $1 million to spend on their divorce, we would have individual therapists for the parents, each parent, individual therapists for the children, a family therapist, counselor to unify and assist with the family dynamics. We might have a custody evaluator.
Sure.
We might have a parenting coordinator. We could go on and on, right?
Yeah.
And so that's not always realistic. But in terms of what type of therapeutic interventions and what type of assistance, mental health professionals can provide, what's the most important thing you think for mediating parents to get? What do they need the most? And I kind of know what the answer is, but
Yeah.
I want to hear from you what you think is the best for them.
I think that they need personal therapists. And the reason why is because they need someone to process the pain of the divorce so that they have an outlet to then, and they need someone to help them to create coping mechanisms at the negotiation table when the time comes to do this work, so that it's not so they can come as their best problem-solving selves. And what happens is that they get triggered by the other parent, and if they haven't been doing the work themselves, then so I teach at Creighton in negotiation and conflict resolution graduate classes, and I teach this methodology, which is that a lot of times party A and party B will see each other as the problem. And when they do, there's just absolutely nowhere to go with that. And so the opportunity is really to separate the people from the problem and for both of the people to be focused externally on what the problem is. The problem and or opportunity is to create the parenting plan. The only way you can do that, the only way you can make it not be good, bad, right, wrong, is to sort of say, I am going to work over here with my mental health therapist on how sad and disappointing and I never thought I was going to be here. I tell that to clients all the time. They'll come in and say, hi. And I'm like, I know that you never walked down the aisle and thought you were going to come into my office. I get it. I know that this is painful. But if you had a therapist to do that work with, or someone in a faith-based community, a confidant, a friend, I know that it's an expensive resource. But then you could be working on those things outside of the mediation process so that when you come into it, or as you are mediating, so that when you come back into it, you can say, okay, I can really be thinking about my kids instead of thinking about how pissed off I am that this person did this to me and how all I want them to do is hurt as bad as I hurt right now. It never works. It's never a zero-sum game like that. And again, the only people that will hurt are the kids.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I was thinking as you were speaking, what can parents do to make mediation as productive and as streamlined and efficient as possible? And one thing, obviously, would be get some individual therapy so that you can leave some of the emotional baggage at the door and come in with a clearer mind maybe. But it strikes me that there are other things that parents could do. For example, maybe learn a little bit about what parenting plans look like, or teach yourself a little bit. What do you think about some other things that parents could do before they get to your door to make the process better and more efficient?
The first thing that I think I hear a lot of people say is that they'll talk to friends who have gone through their divorce. They'll say, can I see what your parenting plan looks like? What do you and your co-parent do? Do you like it? Does it work for you? How old are your kids? What are the pitfalls of a schedule that looks like that, or sharing the holidays this way, or what happens when you move to a different school district? Like, they'll just start getting anecdotal, qualitative stuff from their friends. The next thing is their attorneys. either can prep or give them good ideas as to how to make the process more efficient and how to come in well, and to give them an idea. And this is, for me, critical in the process. I think that parents come into mediation and they'll say to me, "This is never going to work. We don't agree. Thanks for your time. This is compulsory, so I'm checking a box. You seem really nice, but I'm not going to agree to anything." And I'll say, "Okay, tell me a little bit more about that." "Well, blah, 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 blah. I'm just going to go in front of the judge, because when I do, I know that the judge is going to hear all this evidence, going to see 500 pages of text messages and all of these things, and know that the kids should be with me." And I will say, "Have you talked with your attorney? Has your attorney given you an idea of what the likelihood of something like that would be for you to have sole physical custody or sole legal custody? Do you have a sense of how your judge typically rules on these situations? Have you asked your attorney to give you a window into what would happen if you went to litigation? We're strong over here, we're not over there." Any idea about what that looks like? Because one of my favorite stories is a court in Florida, high conflict couple that were frequent flyers that continued to use the system for ridiculous things. At some point, the judge said to the both of them, to the mother, "Do you love your children?" "Absolutely." Said to the father, "Do you love your children?" "Of course." And then the judge said, "Guess who doesn't love your children?" "Me. And you have given me all of the power to make these decisions over and over and over again about your kids." And your kids, in terms of active parenting plan engagement, it's a shelf life. Like, you can make more money, hopefully, as you go on in the years, but you can't get the time back with your kids, and you can't get the relationship back with your kids. So I would say that if you think that you're going to go in front of a judge and you haven't had a good conversation with your attorney about the idea of what that's going to look like, and you just come into mediation and think, "I'm checking a box, I'm saving all my time and money," and there are some cases where that does make sense. But the vast majority of cases, I say that the greatest amount of control that you have is here, because anything that the two of you agree to, I will draft, I will give to your attorneys, they will do a legal review, and it will become a part of the decree, and you will not have to have the judge make any of those decisions. But I think they're so resolute because they're so mad when they come in, and they believe that they're so justified that they don't even want to try. They just want to have the court side with them. And so I think a good conversation with an attorney that can help them to understand, here's what's viable, here's what's likely, here's what's not, is very helpful in the process too.
Yeah, since it's my podcast, I can pull the scab off of this. I think as you were speaking, I was thinking to myself, well, there's good lawyers and there's not so good lawyers, and there's lawyers that accurately report their litigation experience and their handicapping of a case's chances. But there's maybe some lawyers who aren't necessarily always accurate in what they report. And I can confidently say that is a vast minority in my experience. But just getting to this idea that, have you talked to your lawyer about your chances in court? Well, maybe your lawyer's 1 year out, hasn't been in court very much. True. Maybe your lawyer is about to file bankruptcy and really needs you to go litigate your case. Now, again, that sounds pretty callous and jaded, but that's what happens to us litigators. How do you manage that little dynamic where, somebody might be getting pushed into the litigation arena without necessarily, let's not say it's even nefarious. Let's not say it's deliberate. Sure. Let's just say they're not getting great advice on what litigation looks like.
Mm-hmm. So I would talk with them about, and we do talk about this, what are your lines in the sand? How motivated are you within mediation to come to an agreement? Do you have a money tree in the backyard? A lot of times parents will say to me, oh, he is just going to, or she is just going to take me for everything because their parents are paying for it, or they've got unlimited resources. And then I will say, well, let's start to pick out the things that are the most important to you. So if we're going to negotiate, let's figure out what is really critical to you, and then what are the other things that you can compromise on. Because every case is unique and every case is interesting, because based upon who the parties are and who's representing them and the amount of time that I've done this, it's an interesting, I mean, it's a whole game just with those players, and then the judge, and it's an entire amalgamation of players. And so I will know, looking at one side, I'm like, can I reality test whether they should spend their own money? No, that's their choice as to how they're going to do that or what they're going to do. But I do just try to say, do you recognize that frequently, not always, but frequently it will be thousands of dollars and months of a process. And at the end of that time, you may or may not get what you want. You might get a fraction of what you want. You might get everything you want. You might get none of what you want. So as long as we're clear about that and you have an idea of the components that are really important to you, and you've thought through the other pieces that you're willing to compromise with, then whatever they choose to do at that point is their choice. I mean, they have agency. It's not my job to trap them into agreement.
I had an experience recently in a custody case. It was a modification, so you already have momentum for a certain type of custodial arrangement and that sort of thing. And in chambers, a court judge said to me, said to us, the two lawyers, basically, the kind of evidence that I look for in making a change to custody in a modification is much like the kind of evidence that you would need to bring in a juvenile court parental, a sort of a extinguishing of parental rights type of case. So abandonment, drug use, that, super powerful evidence, the kind of evidence that would, sort of get you into juvenile court where your parenting rights were at risk, right? And I think that's a high standard. It's not the district court standard, but and again, I guess we're limiting things to the modification context. So that's a different animal, and we're getting maybe more into the weeds. But that experience suggested to me that if you can take control of your parenting arrangement, you really ought to pull out all the stops to do it, because going to court and thinking that there's going to be some sort of massive change when there is a mixed bag of evidence, just because you think your evidence is better than the other side, that mixed bag is usually a gray, amorphous, very difficult scenario for a judge to make changes. So another long preamble to the question, but what is your approach when you see people talking to you about the power of their evidence and wanting to go to court, when in the back of your mind you sort of have that? I'm sure lawyers have reported their trial experience to you. What kind of wisdom do you bring to that person who thinks they have the super powerful evidence?
The first thing that I say is, if you're sitting here wanting to do this with me with regard to a modification, I get that you're exhausted and fed up and you've had enough, and you're doing it because something happened that you're like, I can't keep living like this. So by that point, I first try to honor the exhaustion that people have. And to an extent, the documentation, because they're like, I have written in the co-parenting app how many times that they've been late, how many times that they have not gone to a medical appointment, how many times that so they're trying to keep track to demonstrate that they have a case. And I will say to them, what is important to you moving forward? Because you can take all of this evidence and you can go to the court and and they'll say to me, what do you see? And I'll say, unless something is egregious, the likelihood of, for example, if you currently have joint legal custody, the likelihood of you getting sole or the likelihood of you being able to be the final decision maker, potentially on a single issue, but not indefinitely moving forward, is very minimal. And I don't think I'm giving legal advice. I just think I'm saying what I see. And I will say I preempt everything. I am not giving you any legal advice. Please talk to your attorney about this. So I just try really hard to let them know, here are the odds of this. So if you recognize that that's the odds of litigation, then what is your opportunity in mediation? And a lot of times I'll say to them, if you could wave a magic wand over the situation, what would you want and why? And they'll say, well, I just want him to show up on time. I just want him to pick up the kids when he said that he will. I just want her to be reliable. And then I'll say, what does that look like? Okay, well, maybe you guys have picked a time. Maybe you guys have picked a routine that isn't working because of somebody's work schedule. And maybe that needs to be reconfigured because maybe your life circumstances look different now than they did 5 years ago when you created the plan. So can we at least try pragmatically in the moment to start thinking about how a few shifts could make a difference? And we'll also sometimes trial things in mediation. Can we come to a mini agreement in mediation that you guys trial for 60 days and see how it works? And if it's working, then maybe you decide not to go forward in litigation. If it's not working, maybe you do feel like that this is your only pathway.
I'm much more dramatic when I talk about those things. So here's what I tell my clients. I tell them to imagine their hearing on temporary issues or their custody trial is scheduled for, let's just say it's scheduled for 10 a.m. And at 8 a.m., the judge hears 1 hour of child support cases where the father or the mother, who's the child support payor, have nothing to do with the child. They're $50,000 behind in child support, and they're hearing case after case of parents who have nothing to do with their child, don't care, and aren't financially responsible for their child. There's lots of cases like that. So on the day of your trial, a judge hears an hour and a half of that type of those types of cases, and then they have a criminal case, and a parent shuffles in an orange jumpsuit in shackles with ankle shackles and handcuffs, and it's their sentencing day for sexual abuse of one of their children, and that sentencing involves background investigation and maybe a report to the court of that person's history and what made them abusive and all these things. And then you get there at 10 a.m. and your lawyer is pounding the table because the car seat for little Bobby was the wrong weight, or you had 5 tardies and so you're getting the kid to school late, and I just say you have to understand these things that you think are horrible parenting are not going to move the judicial needle, and you're not going to get traction or attention with what you have, even though in your life it's devastating because you're being a great responsible parent. And I sort of talk about the benchmark for parenting at the courthouse, might be down here, and the benchmark for parenting at the Catholic school where your kids
Sure,
go to school
sure.
and the mom's group and
Yeah.
what you guys talk about is maybe way up here. And that doesn't always resonate. It doesn't always have the impact that I want it to. But I try to get people to understand that both of you are not the same parent, and you're going to have faults that maybe you don't really perceive. And the other parent is going to have faults that you can't stand. That doesn't necessarily make a good custody case. So let's push you in the direction of being in control of your parenting situation, rather than letting that judge who doesn't love your children, as you say, be in control of your fate. I'm going to pivot. We're going to start talking about actual parenting plans. So we've been talking for quite a while without even talking about the nuts and bolts of a parenting plan. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is the regular parenting schedule. That's what people, this sounds a little cheesy, but back way in the day, I learned this phrase, children spell love Time. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but so this notion of both parents having time is that's how you love your children, and that's how you build memories, and that's how that's how you live your life with an enduring, loving relationship with your children. So the regular parenting schedule is sort of paramount in people's thinking. It makes a huge difference in people's lives. What have you seen evolve over the last 20 years in terms of parenting schedules? How has it changed? And maybe it hasn't changed that much, but I have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think it has. Myself, I am an adult child of divorce, and back in the days of like the Kramer versus Kramer, it was very much believed that a mother would be the one who would have physical custody, and it would look like a Wilson v. Wilson, like the dad would get every Wednesday night and every other weekend with the kids. And I absolutely, most of the time, I read through all the complaints and count and answers before they come to my office, but I make an assumption that parents are going to have some form of equal parenting time when they begin the process, unless a parent is telling me reasons otherwise. And even when parents are saying to me, well, she was never around, I was always the one here, she was on the road with work, that was our understanding. And I will say things like, I appreciate that was the partnership or the role division within the marriage, and also that organically you would see your kid in the kitchen passing by. That still feels real, like they're there. But now that you have two homes, children need the ability to be with both parents. And depending upon what age of children that we're talking about, in terms of frequency of touch points and transitions and all of that, and we can talk about different schedules. But I think that as time has gone on, I believe that the sentiment is that kids should be with both parents, unless there's a reason why. They should be able to have, half-ish, and we can talk about what that looks like, time with dad and with mom.
Yeah, so it feels to me like, just in terms of talking about the real nuts and bolts of a schedule, my cases are falling into 3 different sort of schedules for joint custody: week on, week off, and then what I call the 5-5-2-2 schedule, where you wrap 2 weekdays around a 3-day weekend. And one parent always has Monday and Tuesday, and the other parent always has Wednesday and Thursday. And that seems very common. And then a third schedule is sort of a alternating 2-2-3 schedule, where you just go, you have 3 exchanges a week, and one week you're going to have Monday and Tuesday. And I think it works out that the other week you're going to have Wednesday and Thursday. That seems like a lot of exchanges, but there are parents who really want to not be away from their children for more than 2 or 3 days at a time, which is a whole different discussion about, whether that's really good for the kids or that's child-centered or adult-centered. But those seem to be the 3 schedules I see.
Yeah, I say that those would be the 3 primary ones that I see too. And with any of those, the majority of the time parents are transitioning at school or daycare to try to minimize, especially if it's a high conflict. And then we can talk about what exchanges look like when it's a non-school, non-daycare open day. But, and I would say that a week on, week off, unless it's a high conflict, or if it is high conflict and they want a single point of transition in the week. But that I usually see for older kids, particularly also for teenagers who have the fluidity of being able to drive between parents' homes. A 225 or the 5522 is really nice because you can schedule all of your work around it. If you know you always have your kids on Monday, Tuesday, then you can travel when it's your other parent's weekend, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, be back at the end of the weekend to have your kids on Monday. And that's also a nice schedule too, because the children can sink deeply into each home. There's a single point of transition on week 1, and then there's 3 transitions on week 2, but it's manageable. The 223 is, I think, a really good schedule for parents who have little kids and are scared about they've never been away from them for more than, a day or 2, if that. So for babies, infants, preschoolers, younger elementary school kids, especially when those transitions can be at school and it's just mom dropping off and dad picking up at the end of the day, I think that those work really well. There's differing schedules for people that are living, if one parent's living in Nebraska and another parent's living in a different state, then we're going to look at extended time over school scheduled breaks and in the summer, and that's a different conversation, but yeah.
So I have experience with firefighters and those schedules, and that is, you need a map and a compass sometimes with some of that. And we're not going to get into that, but that's a very unique schedule to try to plan joint custody around. There's also folks who have shift work, or they're working nights, or they're working different weekends, or there's perhaps their schedule, at a year in advance, but it moves around all the time. And I have found that those situations can be more problematic, and but you can work around them. What do you think happens? And this is maybe more of your therapy hat, but what happens to kids when there isn't a routine schedule?
I feel like kids thrive in routine. I mean, they really, if there's predictability, they know what's coming up, then they know how to schedule and plan. And when it is convoluted, it's really tough, I feel like, for them. It just adds another component of stress. And also, when we're creating holiday definitions, for example, I'll have a lot of parents that will say, can we have start and stop times that are similar? So can we have it be 10 a.m. on a Saturday to 5 p.m. on a Sunday for New Year's, for these, so that we don't forget? Because nobody's had a copy of the parenting plan in their back pocket to make sure that they are adhering to whatever that schedule or times look like. So the more erratic, I guess, that schedules are, or the more that parents want to trade days with each other, or I appreciate the fact that nobody wants to have 3 weekends in a row where they don't see their kids. But the more that parents, and I know you know this, the more that parents want to say, on the 7th day we do this thing, and then if it connects to a holiday, then we don't, then we do this thing. Like, the more exceptions that they put in, it makes it confusing for them and for the kids.
Well, it also increases conflict, right? Because when you create these scenarios where we have to be flexible, and we have to talk through this, well, that's fine when you're reading it on a piece of paper. But in real life, life is stressful, and to lack predictability in your parenting schedule when you have a lot of other things going on can really be a problem and create animosity between parents, right? And so I just want to touch upon one thing. And we're getting into maybe an exchange issue here, but it did strike me that when you have that situation where you have to, be flexible, move around, and you have more picking up from the other parent's home, I have found that kids sometimes, if there's a fair amount of conflict, they might not want to come out of the house, or they might not want to go to the other parent. When you pick up from school, the parent starting their parenting time, that's your only ride home. You got to go with that parent. But if you're picking up from the other parent's home, there can be more problems, right? Have you ever had to deal with that?
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask you what you do with that when clients come, because I think one of the hardest things to mediate are contempt charges for parents not forcing their kids to go with the other parent. And I typically see this with teenagers, and they'll say, well, I'm not going to have my 6 foot, 170-pound son, I'm not going to force him to get in a car and go to his dad's house. If he doesn't want to go, he's not going to go. And to your point, if you have a school transition with a non-driving child, they got to get picked up. That will help. But they will say to me all the time, what do I do? What do I do? I can't, and we haven't talked about this or not, and not all mediators do it. But I do interview teenagers in the mediation process for a myriad of reasons. I don't do it all the time, and I only do it when both biological parents agree and sign a waiver of confidentiality and all of those pieces. But I think that it's hard. If you have a child that doesn't want to go, and their parenting plan says that the father's parenting time starts at, 3:00 on a Wednesday, what do we do in those situations? How do we make a child go? And that would be a question that I have for you. I'm curious when your clients ask you that.
Well, there's a couple things that I think of. When we talked with Sarah Batter, she talked about family therapy and working with families to try to get through some of those things. And, that's a perfect world, right? That's, you've got to have oftentimes you need to have a court order for that. And you need a good therapist who can work through some of those issues about why a child might not want to go with a particular parent. So there's that. And I talk with my clients about the potential for that. Anytime that scenario comes up, I think about filing a motion to get family therapy. And I kind of want to find out what health insurance looks like, because even family therapy can be coded so that it's covered by insurance, as far as I can remember. And then I think, getting into the dynamics of that teenager, you just don't know what their heartache is, and whether it's a parent manipulating them or whether they have true feelings of animosity towards a parent. But there are judges out there that will say, you know what, as soon as I sentence the parent that is in possession of this child to a jail term and give them a chance to purge, it's remarkable how the child ends up going over to the other parent. And I've heard that from more than one judge. That is a harsh sort of reality, and it might not necessarily be healthy for the teenager to be told, hey, I'm going to jail unless you start to go over to dad's house. Those dynamics, we could spend a whole podcast on, the kinds of dynamics that happen in families when there's a lot of high conflict. But those are the things that I talk about, once you get into court and a judge sees that a parent's not getting their parenting time, you lose control.
That's right.
There are harsh results. You could end up having to pay attorney's fees. You could end up getting a jail sentence. Hey, if you're in the sales world and somebody does a background check and have been held in contempt, do you really want that? And so there's a number of things that you can talk about in those scenarios, but very, very common, remarkably common, and very, very hard to figure out who's the good guy and the bad guy, because there's never really, you never really get to the bottom of all that. It's again one of those gray areas where you just are not able to discern what's going on. But sometimes it's a really, really horrible situation. You hear about these stories where kids are holed up in their room and they lock the door, and a parent is trying to feed them dinner and they have to slide it under the door. And so even when the child starts to go to the other parent, it's not necessarily an ideal scenario, so having the parenting time happen according to the schedule is not always ideal, because of what happens when the parenting time occurs is a disaster. So I don't really know that I'm answering your question,
No,
but
I
it is a quandary,
conundrum,
that we deal with. Let's talk a little bit about holidays and summer. I'm just going to ask you a question that I think is, I probably think in my mind that it's funnier than it really is. But do you like your holidays chunky? Is the question. So when you go to do a parenting schedule, oftentimes we alternate holidays with the all of the days going to one parent or the other. And we do that because it's fair. And I always say fair is a 4-letter word, starts with F. So but the idea is if parents can't agree on holidays, we're going to alternate them. And so if you hate how your parenting holidays are going in year 1, then you'll love it in year 2, because you're going to get the flip side, right?
Right.
But then if parents get along, then they want to share holidays, right? And but then if you share holidays and you start to not get along in the future, then you've divided these holidays into very carved up sort of things. And so what do you see being the best scenario for parents when it comes to holidays?
I have so many ideas about this. The first thing that I try to honor is, especially this time of year when I'm doing parenting plans, this is a really painful, hard time, because it's their first Thanksgiving, it's their first Christmas, it's their first Hanukkah, it's their first. And I always say to parents, the first time that you go through this will be the hardest, because you're presumably having to create new rituals, new traditions, and you may be doing it on a day that's different than when you've always done it in the past. Parents a lot of times will say to me, well, we're going to keep trick-or-treating together. We're going to keep having the kids wake up on Christmas morning and, I'll just go to his house or she'll just come to my house. And so to ease them as we're defining holidays, I will say, you can celebrate anything that you want to together, but in the event that you're unable or unwilling, we're going to create these worst case scenario, holiday definitions for protected parenting time. And I remember one family was saying to me, I can't ever imagine a time when we wouldn't be doing this together. And I said, how do you feel about doing that with each other's new partners? And it had never crossed their mind that would be another factor coming into it, because that is traditionally when people come back into mediation, when a new person has entered into the co-parenting dynamic. And so I've said, maybe you trick or treat for the first couple of years together, and then you realize that it's actually better for the children if you don't. So with regard to the length of time for a holiday, I mean, what I would say to parents is that a district school schedule is very helpful to bring to a mediation session, because if you're in Omaha Public Schools, like for example, you're getting a whole week of Thanksgiving off. But if you're in a different district, you have to go to school Monday, Tuesday. So we start to look at the reality of kind of what their life looks like. Do you travel? Do you want to go see your sister in Virginia or your parents in Denver? Can you visualize yourself needing, what kind of time do you need? The thing I would counsel, if I could wave a magic wand, is for parents to not split the day, to actually have it be a real holiday where their kids are not having to quickly open up a Christmas gift, not be able to play with it, but have to get dressed, and because they need to transition to be at the other parent's house. It's just, I would want parents to think about what it would feel like to be their child. Does the child want to hang out with their cousins and want to be able to not worry about having to eat the dinner quickly? Or I also say, like, for the 4th of July and for New Year's Eve, we shouldn't be transitioning at night. Like, the fun happens at night, and also it's not safe usually. So I encourage parents to try to build a chunkier, heartier amount of time at the holidays. And then we talk through vacation parenting time so that if they do travel, they have more options to, and parents will talk about the number of consecutive days that they are comfortable being away from their children. Sometimes that's 7, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 10. But we try to think about what are the kinds of ways that you're going to celebrate these holidays. Do you want a touch point with your child on their birthday, or is it okay that you do that on the weekend before or after their birthday? Just, it's painful for them because they've never had to think about it like this before. They've never had to consider that Christmas can still be magical even if it's not on the morning of December 25th. And it's recalibrating them to recognize that the why behind the what. It's not the definition of noon on Christmas Eve to noon on Christmas Day. It's how do you want to feel in that moment, and how do you want your kids to feel? Do you want winter break for them to be rejuvenating? Do you want them to have a chance to be making memories with dad and making memories with mom? Well, they're probably going to need time to be able to do that. So some of it is just the whiplash that parents have of realizing this is all going to look different. I'm not going to the, Okoboji house to do what we did in the summertime because that's his family's lake house, and I've got to reconfigure something different, and that makes me really sad.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think longer periods of vacation that alternate is what you want in terms of the guardrails or the fences for your parenting plan. And then if you agree informally to do something different, then that's what you agree on, and you've departed from the parenting plan, which is how it should work.
Exactly,
right?
It should evolve.
And so if one person has 4 or 5 days at Thanksgiving, where you have the child or children from the time the school is released to the time they go back, maybe on Thanksgiving Day, mom wants to have a brunch with her family, and maybe by 2 p.m, you transition over to dad's family in the traditional Thanksgiving afternoon.
It's okay.
That's great, but in terms of what you would put in the hard and fast parenting plan, it might not look like that. So that seems like it makes common sense. But again, talking about the child-centered versus parent-centered thing, I feel like there's a fair amount of parents, when they get to the holidays, it becomes emotional. And there's a grasping for, I can't go through Thanksgiving without seeing my child. So there's no way I'm ever going to agree to anything other than dividing the holiday somehow and splitting it up. As you said, that seems to be a parent-centered approach to looking at the holiday versus how a child might feel about it. How do you address that in mediation?
So for Thanksgiving, when a parent says, well, and they won't say, I can't imagine, they'll make it sound like both parents need it. Well, we should both be able to celebrate that with them on Christmas or Thanksgiving. So I will say, like, if the kids don't have school Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then the weekend, I'll say, are 48-hour windows viable? So sometime on Wednesday to sometime on Friday to take back to school on Monday, and then flip it so that every other year you have the day of Thanksgiving. And then if a parent says, well, I want to travel, I'm going to, when it's my year for Thanksgiving, I want to be able to go to wherever my family is. And then they'll say, but I'm not going to travel every year. So then sometimes we will come to an agreement that says, this is what the holidays are going to look like if parents are in town. And if they are going to travel and they provide a 30-day notice to the other parent, then they can have a longer period of time. So my goal, parents will say to me, I need everything written in here, because if it's not explicitly stated, then, she's just going to do whatever she's going to do. And I will say to them, unfortunately, we cannot come up with every potential scenario, whether that's you getting a new job, you getting married to another person, you moving and buying a different house in a different school district, your kid needing services for something that you couldn't have anticipated. So we're going to do the best that we can with right now. But the goal in a strong, constructive co-parenting relationship is good communication and being able to say, here's where we're at right now. And co-parent communication is a ginormous part of a parenting plan and a huge issue, because you can have the document, but it's up to interpretation and then people's ideas about what that means or doesn't mean. But I just always say, work with each other. And then when you do come to an informal agreement, document it somewhere in a co-parenting app or text or wherever you want to do that basically says, hey, just confirming that you said that it was okay to do da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, so I just, holidays bring up more power and control dynamics than almost a regular schedule in some ways. So I hear from maybe a client or an opposing party, well, he never celebrates Easter. He doesn't even believe in God. I want every Easter. And then you think, well, past is past. That's right. We're opening the door to, as you stated earlier, we're opening the door to a new dynamic. How do you handle those kind of entrenched sort of thoughts about, well, they don't even care. I want, 8 out of 10 of the holidays just for me. How would you handle that?
So, for example, with the Easter component, if they say, I always go to church and he's never taken he doesn't even go with us. I will say, we need to look at holiday and vacation parenting time as bonus parenting time in a calendar year. We no longer necessarily attach it to a thing that it has to be. Like, for example, with Thanksgiving, parents will say, all my family's here. He doesn't even have any family here. We always do the big get together at whatever time. And that seems crazy to me, that the kids would just be sitting with him in his apartment alone having a dinner when they could be over at, with all the cousins and playing the football in the backyard. And I will say, but that is his opportunity to be able to have additional parenting time in a calendar year, whether he makes the same Thanksgiving dinner that you do, or whether he takes them to church or he doesn't take them to church, or whether she has that elf on the shelf thing, which God help you, I put that into parenting plans too. But it's like, whatever the other parent chooses to do, short of it being a safety issue for a child, that is just their choice to be able to exercise that parenting time in the way that they would want to. And one of the values I think that parents have coming into the process is it should feel equitable. And even though you value going to church on an Easter morning, or you value having a certain Thanksgiving dinner at a specific time, it doesn't mean that can't change every other year.
Yeah. So that reminds me of the right of first refusal,
Dear God.
because we come across these scenarios for parents where they're judging the quality of the parenting going on, and they're judging the parent, the biological parent, being amiss or gone, and they don't like that. And they're like, well, if they're not available to parent the child, I want that parenting time. And I feel like there has been a paradigm shift over the last 20 years, maybe, where judges are fed up with the conflict that causes, and they just say, look, and I sort of believe this. If your children are with their grandparents, or they're with really good friends, or they're with the boyfriend or girlfriend who is a solid citizen, then what's the beef, really? Like, you know what? I think you agree with me that judges' attitude pretty much is, look, that's their parenting time. You don't get to control it. And if it's not in your mind suitable because of who's doing the supervision, well, too bad. So what do you think of the right of first refusal with that preamble?
Gosh. Yeah, I feel like I wish attorneys, because I never introduce it as an issue in mediation. If a party introduces it, like in an initial private session, if they say, and I'll say, what question have I not asked you that's important to you? And they will say, oh, John told me I need to make sure to get a right of first refusal in. And I'll say, okay, why is that important? Well, because I'm pretty sure that she's not going to use her parenting time, and I want it to be mine if she's going to go out at night or going to go do whatever she's going to do. I find, especially in remediation, they are just ripe for gotcha moments. And honestly, if a child is young enough, they're not going to be able, I'll say to them, do you recognize how hard that this is to know when the other parent has been gone for more than 6 hours, or has been, certainly an overnight is, whatever, but like, unless you're asking your kid every time that they come back home, did somebody take care of you that wasn't your mom? Then you're never going to know. And that shouldn't be a conversation that you ask your child, unless your child says to you, I had this really not good experience, like with a babysitter that came over that I didn't know, and I felt, that's a very different conversation to have. But what a parent does do on their parenting time is their choice. And do some parents spend every single minute with their children on their parenting time? Yes. And do other parents not? And some of them not spend, in my perspective, from as a mother myself, like enough parenting time? Yes. But that's their choice. And that's a really hard pill to swallow. But I think that the right of first refusal, I get the intent of it. I understand that if I can't be with them, I would want my co-parent to be with them. But there are many trusted adults that I would hope that parents would have in their sphere, even if they don't have extended family members here that could serve in that capacity, that kids have fun hanging out with, that person, or a babysitter for a few hours. And parents are also people too. So.
Yeah, I say something like it takes a village, and I duck because, people want to punch me when I say that. But, there's lots of things that children can be enriched by when it comes to other caretakers. And so it's not necessarily all that god awful of a thing. But we probably should talk about the legal custody issues.
Yes.
And I see legal custody issues falling into sort of 3 or 4 important categories, and I'm going to try to put them in order of priority. One would be medical and health, maybe, and then the maybe 1A would be education, and then after that you get into sort of a cascading, like activities, sports, and cultural things for children to be enriched by, and then religion. Not to downplay it, but that usually is something that people seem to kind of get through and be all right with. But joint legal custody, I'm just going to create a scenario where you have you joint legal custody in whatever definition. Every state probably has their own statutory definition, and then you have a child with a medical issue where the parents fundamentally disagree. I mean,
Yes.
let's talk about ADHD, because
Yes.
you and I have talked about that
Yes.
for
Yes.
a very long time with lots and lots of people.
Yes. Yes.
And it's the go-to issue in my mind that not always, but often you find people who one parent just fundamentally disagrees to medication. I don't even want them to get tested.
Mm-hmm.
What are you talking about? And the other parent is like, little Johnny is running in circles at my house and is bouncing off the walls. We got to do something. So let's talk about that conundrum for a minute. How do you try to address that in a parenting plan?
I will first start by saying that I experienced this for 18 months in the pandemic when I was mediating over Zoom before anybody knew how to use Zoom, really. And I didn't know how to get people to stop talking or fighting. And so I would just hit mute, and then I'd be like, no one can hear you anymore. But that was happening to me with vaccinations because you can't have half a shot.
Right.
It's either an all or nothing thing. And then when we kind of came back in person, then it was the ADHD comes up all the time. What I first try to do when those situations transpire is to say, what professionals, because we need outside voices in the conversation. So what is happening at school? Have you had a conversation with the teacher? Have you had a conversation, like if there is an IEP, an individualized education plan for a child? Can we start there first? What's coming from that? What is the pediatrician saying? What is, sometimes one parent will do research and bring in a couple of articles to the conversation. The other parent will bring different articles to the conversation. The problem is fundamentally when one parent says, this is a real issue. I understand it's an issue because we're seeing it with grades, with, what's happening at school, where I'm seeing it at my house. And the other parent is saying, I see it at my house too, but I fundamentally think that it needs to be treated differently. I think that it should be a behavioral thing versus a medication component. I always ask if the child is engaged in any form of therapy and if you can use that professional to provide a recommendation to both parents as to what they would do in that situation. So if the child is struggling with behaviors or focus or whatever the symptoms are, I try really hard to bring in to have them bring in an outside expert. So, because again, it's just them doing this. And that's the problem with joint legal custody, is that there is nowhere to go. If you're saying yes and you're saying no, and then the problem too with that, and that this is where parents will say, well, this is why I need sole legal custody, or at the very least, I need to be the final decision maker. Mm-hmm. Because we're going to go round and round and round, and I don't want to go back to mediation if we can't agree, because we're just going to be spending constantly time and money in this process. But if you have an outside expert who can give information, and if you have 3 of them that parents can vet and agree on, are we going to use, and based upon who's in network and who carries the insurance coverage, and then say it looks like we could get into X, Y, and Z practitioners or providers, and then have somebody else tell them what they would do. If they have the ability to agree on the provider and then agree that they will follow the recommendations of the provider, that's an ideal situation. But that's not a lot of times how it happens. A lot of times one parent will say, he went and got him tested and didn't even ask me, and now there's a diagnosis, and now they want to put him on this, and I am not doing that. And he shouldn't have been able to even get him tested without my consent or permission to do that. So I will say, is there another provider that you guys could agree on and have the situation assessed? because he is saying that it's a real issue. And I don't know what you see in court when that.
I've recently had a situation where a judge ordered, that if a parent goes and finds a medical provider that provides an opinion on the care of a child and a medical recommendation, or that the other parent has a certain amount of time to go get a second opinion.
Okay.
And then if the medical providers disagree, then there was a scenario for that. And at first glance, if it feels like that is handling the situation appropriately and with a lot of forethought, as you sort of dissect it, you wonder, it's almost like one of Dante's circles of hell, when you think about anytime a lawyer or the legal system is trying to predict the future, we get into trouble. So just to give you an example, prenuptial agreements are a nightmare because you try to predict what kind of real estate somebody's going to buy and how they're going to hold it and what's going to happen here and what's going to happen there. And anytime a lawyer is doing that, they are walking the plank because you're taking risks about things that are going to be happening in the future. So I don't want getting up on a soapbox, but the point of all that is that when you're sitting there with a parenting plan and you have a page and a half of single space writing on how you're going to handle a medical opinion and a second opinion and 30 days for this, and this is going to happen, life just doesn't work that way, And so I think we can, try to create guardrails, try to create if-then statements, sort of like, if this happens, then we're going to do this. But the ifs change. And so it's a sort of a head scratcher.
I have had some parents, like if I have a physician at the table or if I have an educator at the table, they will say, and I have frequently put what I call a 2-stop rule into the plan. So parents will have to engage meaningfully on a topic. And if it's not working, they can type in stop. A certain amount of time has to pass to allow them to be able to either get more information, pause, breathe, whatever, come back, try again. And if they put a second stop in, then at that point, there's either a final decision maker or they go back to mediation before they can litigate. And what I discover is that sometimes parents will say, well, you have an expertise as a physician. So if I get to a place where my feedback, my input has been heard, and then, we can't agree, I will defer to your expertise, or you're an educator, I will defer to yours. The only time that I ever get that, rarely do I get it, that a final decision maker, which is only ever the mother or the father or one parent, the other parent, would be, it's just very, very few and far between. The majority of them are, you get education, you get elective medical, you get religion, you get behavior and consequences. We'll talk about activities together. And I'm not paying for anything. Like, if you want to take them to soccer, great, but I'm not taking them on my days and I'm not paying half. But it's challenging because you really have to have a good reason as to why that other parent shouldn't have a say in the conversation. And the other component that's really challenging with joint legal is the response time. So if one parent puts in written documentation like, here's the decision that needs to be rendered, I think this should be done, here's the pathway for doing it, and then crickets, and then they're saying, so Kelly, at what point then do I get to, so I have put that in parenting plans before, that if the other parent that has received the request for information or decision making does not respond within 72 hours or 1 week or whatever you guys pick, then the parent that is requesting the decision with whatever the solution is moves forward. So sometimes you can do things like that, but it's a challenging piece.
Yeah. So I was thinking about parenting plans where a judge might say, well, in even numbered years, you get ultimate decision-making authority on medical issues. And then in odd numbered years, the other parent gets final decisions. And can you imagine
that?
Well, I mean, I'm creating an absurd example to drive the point home, right? Mm-hmm. So, little Bobby is on ADHD meds and is seeing a psychotherapist in odd numbered years. And then the next year they're off the meds and they're not going to therapy, So that's like an absurd example. But I think what happens in courts is the judges throw up their hands and they say, you know what, you two people loved each other at one point and you decided to have children together and you're darkening my door with all these intricate, granular parenting problems. And you're expecting me to figure out how to decide those for you. Cut it out. And they have to work with the tools that they have. And the tools at the courthouse are blunt.
Exactly.
And the tools with you are sharp. And people don't understand that. And so you can go to court because, darn it, you're right. And then you can get a very blunt instrument and it may be almost unworkable. And you may say, oh, the judge is just splitting the baby. The judge doesn't really care. They gave odd numbered years here and even numbered years here and decision making, and they did all this horrible stuff. Well, what other avenues did they have
them to do?
Because they have to treat both parents fairly.
That's right.
And choosing one parent as the ultimate decision-making power over the other never feels like justice.
No.
And
I will say to parents, the judge is never going to ask you all of the things I am going to ask you about ballet. The judge is never going to be interested in all of the different concerns that you have about fill in any issue. And I will take down all of that information and we will sort through it. And I'm interested in all of the gray area between where you are and where the other parent is. And in mediation, there are so many creative, collaborative, problem-solving opportunities, but there's only so much that the legal system can do because, there has to be precedent. There has to be a reason why they are ruling in the way that they are. And a lot of times people will walk away feeling like, I thought I was going to feel, that I had all of this time and money was worth it. And a lot of times they go, God, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
And not to minimize anything that you do, because I think it's so important. I think it's a powerful partnership.
Yeah. And I'm going to hearken you back to the idea that the judge wasn't interested. I think if that judge was sitting with you on at a restaurant and was a good friend, of course that judge would be interested. But as the judge is trying to listen to your evidence, there's a pile of people lining up in the corridor to bring more cases and more evidence and more cases and more evidence, and they're overwhelmed. And so they're interested, but they don't have the time.
No.
The system doesn't allow for the type of investigation and the type of work that you're doing.
Yeah, the system is not designed to do that.
And so I think that it is really, really important to get as much done in mediation as you possibly can. We are definitely going to have you come back because I have a list of things to talk about here with parenting plans, and so we'll just do a part 2. And so we're gonna put a cork in this one. It was really, really great to talk to you about this stuff.
Really good to talk with you as well.
I feel like we've been climbing up opposite sides of the same mountain in some ways because we have so many common experiences, but we're taking such a different approach that it's interesting to talk to somebody who's just doing the same kind of stuff and seeing the same things in families and kids and people. But is bringing a different set of tools to the problem. And
who wants the same outcomes ultimately, I would hope, is that you want these kids to be able to have, and these parents to be able to start a new chapter, and to be able to know that it doesn't have to be the end. Like the financial settlement, the parenting plan, that's one way of being able to say what can be new and how can we make good choices to the best of our ability right now so that our kids have what they need moving forward. And I feel like we're both aligned in that.
Yeah, there's a organization called the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, and they have a set of sort of ethical rules that are, they're not like they're not like a binding set of rules like our ethical canons are. But they have a section of the bounds of advocacy that really deals with the lawyer's responsibility to advocate for a client, but to have a child's best interest as being a not paramount, but something that you have to factor in your decision making and how you approach a case. And the idea is that you don't put on your armor and become a gladiator for a parent
At the expense.
if your weapons are hurting a child.
Right.
It's probably maybe not the best way to express it, but you do have a responsibility as a lawyer to protect children. And you have a responsibility to talk to your clients about the practical reality of litigation being harmful to a child. And we talked to Sarah Batter about that a little bit. And so you have to have your eye on what's happening with children. It's a unique role for a lawyer. And there's lots of litigators out there who are not engaged in family law litigation that don't have to worry about those sorts of things, but there is a unique responsibility there. So, well, with that, let's close up shop, and we will figure out a way to get you back. Okay?
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much. All right. Thanks for joining us on Artful Divorce. If today's episode was helpful, you can find more information at www.artfuldivorce.com. The information provided in this podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. For personalized legal advice tailored to your situation, consult a qualified attorney licensed in your area.